We come to our last faculty lecture. A very dear colleague of mine, Subi, and I joined INSEAD the same year, 1994, Subi, and we talked about the importance of talent mobility. Subi, someone coming from India, educated in the US, who has then settled for the last 2 decades in France, where he first became known as an expert on global strategy. But then, as we've seen today, one of the problematic areas of management practice today is this relationship between business and society. Something where you can feel that practice is shifting, social expectations are shifting, and yet it's very slippery. Subi has been wrestling with this for many years now, and he's going to come up and share with us his current thinking. Please join me in welcoming Subi Rangan. Subi. Thank you. Good to thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm really so impressed that people are still seated here. You must be terribly tired or it's raining outside. It's very interesting because we concluded with this statement about business as a force for good. What I know is that business is a force. The question and the worry is whether it is a force for good. As I was coming over here yesterday in the Wall Street Journal is a full page, or at least a half-page article, and I don't know, some of you may have seen it. It says, "A Fading Faith in Capitalism." Yesterday's Wall Street Journal, and I was quite struck because this is in the US. The Wall Street Journal is supposed to be pro-business, and yet this is what they were saying. Now, why does this matter? It matters because more and more of the world is adopting capitalism. It's not just old Europe or the West, Japan, United States, etc. It's also Asia, India, China. It's now more and more Africa, which is adopting capitalism. And if we have concerns, it really behooves us to think carefully, especially at a business school, as to whether the ideas that we are teaching and the problems that we're concerned about have ways to be addressed. And if you think about this, if you think about how the world works, one view that people have is if you want to predict, if you want to explain what's going to happen, you have to understand who has the power, and you have to understand what their interests are. That's how the world works. It's power times interests. And whenever power changes, maybe the outcomes change, or if the interests change, and business has power. And it's not clear whether this goes away. Now, fortunately, since the Enlightenment, over some periods now, the last few centuries, we have created some other ways to approach this power times interest model. And there are 2 antidotes that we have come up with. One is ideas, and the other is institutions. If you want to tame this model of power times interest, you can only tame it, you can never take it away. If you want to tame this idea of power times interest, you've got to think about ideas and institutions. Slavery was stopped not because the slave owners lost power or because slaves got power. Thank you. It wasn't because their interests changed. It is the power of ideas. And eventually, today, we have created institutions of human rights. And so this is a very powerful way, and it's a hopeful way. Now, when you think about ideas, I'm so thrilled to be in Vienna. This morning, we heard about innovation, and I think about Schumpeter. This afternoon or earlier, we heard about business management practices. And Peter just reminded me that this is Peter Drucker's home country. Who could have taught us more about management than Peter Drucker? And, I'm talking about capitalism, and von Mises and especially Hayek. All Austrians have given the world amazing ideas. And strangely, what I'm going to talk about comes back to another Austrian who did his work just a few miles away from here 100 years ago. So Austria, it seems, has prefigured so many things, and Austrian intellectuals have prefigured so many things. Now, if you think about capitalism, what is the most usual chant or refrain? The most usual refrain we hear is Tina. How many of you have heard of Tina? Right? There is no alternative. So, we should go and get coffee. Now, I hope when we do go and get coffee in a few minutes, you will remember Tiba. There is a better alternative. And that's what the quest is all about. I don't think I have more insight into it in terms of the proportion of the gap, but certainly I would like to share with you in the next few minutes how I've been thinking about it, where might the problem be, and where might some approaches that are promising lie. And then we break. So I have a whole bunch of slides here. Most of this is very familiar to you, so not everything I'm going to pause and talk about, but I am going to talk about something that is worth setting up front. And I'll come back, but in case in my slides you're lost, here's where I'm coming out of. What is the central problem for humanity? The central problem for humanity is our interdependence. Whether it is inside Europe or whether it globally, our central problem is interdependence. One kind of interdependence is our civic interdependence, which is why we want peace. We want to avoid conflict, our civic interdependence. And we've addressed that with an institution called the state, which has a monopoly on violence. Now, it doesn't work perfectly, but no institution works perfectly. But our civic interdependence is the first one. We want peace. The second interdependence we have is our economic interdependence. We want to specialize. We want to innovate. We want to increase efficiency. And we call that prosperity. And we've addressed that through an institution called market. Property rights. These are institutions that have helped us address our second interdependence, which is economic. We can specialize and exchange. When that works, we not only have peace with the first institution, the state, we have prosperity with enterprise and markets. And that's what we call enterprise capitalism. Fantastic. But there is a third interdependence that we're becoming more and more concerned and sensitive and alert to. And that is our moral interdependence. What institution will help us address our moral interdependence? Can you think about the minimum wage versus a living wage? Should the market set the wages? The labor market seems to be one of the worst functioning markets. Human capital, we can study it, but somehow it seems to disappoint all of us, whether in the proportion of women or in the pay paid to women, let alone in the youth unemployment. So clearly our moral interdependence to future generations. Now, what is interesting is the first two interdependencies, that is the civic interdependence and the economic interdependence, have been addressed by institutions that are contractarian institutions. Thomas Hobbes was a contractarian, and he said, we make a social contract. We consolidate power, and we will all surrender our authority or our violence to that. The same thing in the market. They are contractarian, implicit and explicit contracts that work out of mutuality. I give up some liberty to have security. That's the contract with the state. I give up my liberty to get more security. And I'm going to become interdependent with you or engage in trade because it's mutually beneficial. The third kind of problem, the moral interdependence, requires a different kind of institution. And it's not going to be based on mutuality. It's going to be probably based on morality, which is how a mother takes care of a child. Gautam Buddha apparently said, a mother doesn't take care of the child because of some anticipated future returns. It is what a mother does. And therein lies an answer I'm going to develop. Okay, so that's where I'm going. Let's get with the program. So there is, at least for the next 10 years, not grain, but at least trees. So hopefully we'll, and the title of my talk I called End Capitalism. Of course, it's meant to be a pun, but let's see how this goes. So we understand very clearly that capitalism is very, very successful in elevating many, many people out of material misery and creating a whole bunch of wealth and value. And what are the good things? It fosters economic exchange that is voluntary. It creates an incentive alignment among unrelated actors. You do not have to deal with your family or your friends. Capitalism is fantastic in integrating us in this way. It increases efficiency, innovation. Competition is very important for that innovation. And it rewards adaptiveness. That is, resources that are once allocated, when circumstances change, they do get reallocated better in a market system. This is why communism failed. It had good central plans, but once the world changed, as it always does, we don't know whether it's the refugee crisis, whether it is cybersecurity, or whether it is the emergence of new technologies, but we do need to adapt. And capitalism is generally better at doing that. And this morning, and again, this afternoon, I think Ilian has mentioned the role of freedom. One of the reasons Hayek thought capitalism was very important was because it emphasized freedom to enter and exit businesses. But he said that same freedom enters into your political life, into your religious life, into your personal choices. Freedom is freedom, whether it is freedom to do business, to be an entrepreneur, or freedom in our lives in the choices that we make. So freedom and liberty are again associated, hence we call it free market capitalism. And the free is very important. And it is even today more important, maybe in Asia and Africa. And of course, we care about wealth and value and dynamism and vitality. And these are the things that the market and capitalism can give us. So this is fantastic. So capitalism rocks. Great. But we recognize there are problems, there are obstacles. Let's look at very quickly, there are problems of commission and there are problems of omission. Here's where I go very rapidly. So we've seen, of course, climate change. This is continuing to be too much food, too little food. Mobility, inequality, relative poverty has gone up. And it's not clear what the problem is and what the solution would be on this. Everything seems to be about money. And whether it's in Europe, whether it's in India, whether it's in China, whether it's in Petrobras in Brazil. When Vivian talked about Petrobras in Brazil, just one company and corruption. And an entire economy is a negative GDP, 2% negative. And 2016 recession too. And it's not just individual companies, it's entire societies. It's a dramatic thing. And we've talked about how much regulation there is. Regulation seems to be just the inverse or the obverse of trust. In Europe, like in Brazil, government does not trust business, and there is a lot of regulation. In the United States, business does not trust government, and there's a lot of lobbying. But it's the same way. There is too little, in Europe, government regulates business, and in America, business regulates government. It's just the same thing, okay? It's both a problem of trust. Now, part of the problem is the idea of rationality and modernity, which says, you should work harder. And if you work harder, you will earn more money. And if you earn more money, you will be able to buy more things. And if you buy more things, you might be happier, but maybe not keep going. This is modern rationality. It's a pile of goods. And how much you have is supposed to make you happier, better, and increase your esteem. We see that those who do get there seem to be somewhat disappointed. And hence we wonder, is there a different approach? Errors of omission. We've talked about education, the human capital. This is the finger that is the moon. The moon is somehow saying, hey, we've got to get the kids adapted, agile, and able to get jobs. Now, in Austria and in Germany and Switzerland, this is okay. But in France, youth unemployment, let alone in Greece or Spain, is really now taken for granted. We just say, what can we do? And we can probably do something different, right? Is it all about money? This question seems to be, sometimes people say it's mostly about money, but it's also about well-being. So, and this goes on to say, can we have not just growth, but inclusive growth? Whether it is urban versus rural, whether it is men versus women, the bottom line, the question seems to be, the moral question seems to be about fairness. Capitalism seems to work. It seems to produce efficiency, but it's not producing as much fairness as we would like. Now, maybe, just maybe, we cannot do any better. So we should be willing to understand that we are better off today than we were 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago. There is no contest about that. And maybe we cannot do better. So maybe we are in the second best, and we should just get used to it. But maybe we should keep trying. It seems like capitalism has not finished evolving. And this is where I go to, so how do we avoid all of this situation? Well, there are many problems. We talked about Tina, this mindset that there is no alternative. Is there a TIBA? We talked about, the interdependence in institutions. Can we move to institutional innovation, not just technical or business model innovation? For this coming world, we also need institutional innovation. And one of the big reasons why institutions matter is because business is competitive. We can't expect individual businesses, whether it is Firmenich or somebody else, to alone save the world. Novo Nordisk is an amazing company, but the pharmaceutical industry has lost trust so badly. Novo is an incredible but one company. And many times people say, you know what, I agree with you. I would be willing to change, but if everyone else changed. How do we get everyone else to change? There is a coordination problem. This is where ideas and institutions and the very paradigm of capitalism is very important. And that's what we need to work towards. At least some scholars need to be thinking about this, right? At the system level, the paradigm level. And so my idea that I'm going to discuss with you tongue-in-cheek is end capitalism. What do I really mean? Let's look at what capitalism kind of has been about. This is the useful theory that has come our way from hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years, we think, from the Dutch, from the Brits, and eventually a Scot called Adam Smith started to give us some ideas of how does this really work. And he emphasized the division of labor. And he said the division of labor causes specialization, which causes productivity, and productivity, we understand, is the holy grail. Great. It's true today, and it's universally true. It's true in Kenya or South Africa. It will be true in Nigeria or in Mongolia, China, India. So that's fantastic. But what we need with this division is another operator. We need an integration. We need not only division on the means, but we need integration on the ends. What do I mean by integration? Go back to this moral interdependence. What is this moral interdependence? What do we need to integrate? We need to integrate three things. One, we need to better integrate market and society. Two, we need to better integrate nature and humanity. And three, we need to better integrate present and future. These are the three integrations. What does it mean, market and society? Many people say, if you focus on not only on the market and society, it means putting people at the center of the economy. My concern is there are people at the center of the economy. It's just not all people. There are a few people at the center of the economy. We want more people at the center of the economy. That's what we mean by inclusion, right? And so this integration of ends is really where we need to go. Capitalism has been about means. We need to develop that further, but also start thinking about the neglected ends. And Adam Smith, when he wrote the theory of moral sentiments, he had these views already prior to his book about the wealth of nations. Everybody knows that Smith wrote these two very famous books. We just need to consult them more carefully. If we did that, how would we kind of advance this paradigm of capitalism? So capitalism, I would offer to you today, has two legs, two main pillars. One pillar is what we call the institutions of property rights, private property rights. And when we get those private property rights, then we have incentives for effort and innovation. This is fantastic. The second aspect or pillar of capitalism is information. Not just incentives, I need information. I'm ready to work, but where? Should I produce more biotechnology? Should I produce robotics? Market prices will tell me that. And so market prices and private property were the two main pillars of capitalism, and they've worked tremendous wonders. When you see privatization, whether that is in India or whether that is in France, we expect efficiency and effort to go up. When you see more complete markets and liquid markets, we see better information. So some people might think high-frequency trading is unequivocally bad. Well, actually, it might create a better flow of information and a reallocation of resources. So that's fine, but we need a third pillar. So incentives, very important. Information, very important, but there's a third pillar that needs to be better developed. For want of a better word, I'm calling it integration. I could have called it intentions. I want market actors to be intentional. I want you to think about what is your intent. Is it purely performance, or can you integrate performance with progress? Whether you are selling coffee or ride sharing. So from Firmenich, we heard, what is going to be the alliteration? I like alliterations. What is going to be the P word? Property, prices, and propriety. Propriety refers to what is proper. And this is where it goes to your question this morning about integrity. What is proper? And this is a moral question, not a question of mutuality. How much to pay the supply chain from Inditex in Turkey? How often should I make fast fashion? Maybe Inditex is a billionaire and we're all consuming too much. Patagonia has taken the opposite road. The founder of Patagonia says, my company will never go public. I could grow like this tomorrow. He takes out a big ad in the New York Times, a one-page ad with a jacket, and he says, don't buy this jacket unless you really need to use it and you don't have one that we can repair. That's Patagonia, right? So the question is, what is proper? This is a moral question. It is not a technical, political, or economic question. Without propriety, we will only have regulation, and there is not enough regulation or enough enforcement, whether it is in the LIBOR laws, whether it is in fuel emissions, or whether it is regarding climate change, what Exxon knew and when it knew, and what it reported and didn't report. So the argument I'm making is we need to develop a third leg. Third leg that emphasizes propriety. How to do this, and it has to be micro-consistent. This is at a paradigm macro level. And the things I'm trying to integrate, market and society, present and future, humanity and nature. So how does this propriety work? The propriety works on the principle of pain points. This morning, we heard an example from Firmenich. What is a pain point? 2.5 billion people do not have access to private sanitation. All of them are in emerging economies. I grew up in India. I know exactly what he's talking about. And Firmenich is saying, we're going to, with the Gates Foundation, address this malodor thing. Seems small, unbelievable big impact if it works out. And like this, there are other companies. BlaBlaCar talked about this ride sharing, and then he did this calculation, young Frederick, about carbon emissions and the costs and so on. This is a pain point. If you can integrate performance and progress, that's fantastic. So pain point is the gap between how the world is versus how the world ought to be. Can be on gender, can be on consumption, can be on youth and employment. How the world is versus how the world ought to be. What is progress? When you move from ought to be to the world is. And This requires not only a means capitalism and the market strategies that we know, it requires an end capitalism and non-market strategies. Market strategies focus on performance. Non-market strategies focus on progress. Performance for the enterprise, progress for society. Whether it is in unemployment, whether it is in skill gap. And talking about the skill gap, it is very clear then, Bruno, I hope that in future versions you will not only have competence, but also character. I don't know what competence is needed in 5 years in Singapore or in France or in Austria, but I know one thing, that character will be required everywhere. And so that's something that we need to start thinking about and working on. And some economists and some philosophers have talked about the economy of esteem. Might we rehabilitate the economy of esteem? In olden times, 50 years, 100 years ago, people had honor. They had esteem, and esteem is not only self-esteem, esteem is social esteem. It's not something I possess, it is something you possess that you give me based on my conduct. Can we go back to this economy of esteem? Maybe technology is going to help us, but we need to get there. We need to rehabilitate this economy of esteem. Here comes why Vienna and who in Vienna has already given us this. Which institution could help us? There is an institution which is underdeveloped in theory and in practice. It is the institution of roles. What is role theory? Role theory, basically, roles are positions in a social domain, in a social structure. And we attach obligations to those. A mother is a role, a professor is a role, a priest is a role. We expect the Pope to behave the way this Pope is behaving. We are all conferring esteem on the Vatican because that person is behaving in role. So there are jobs and there are roles. And if we can attach, and roles have idealized expectations, it is where self-regulation starts. How does it work? Well, people in roles, firstly, are more likely to exercise a logic of appropriateness, not just a logic of consequences. A logic of consequences is a logic of mutuality. What's in it for me? A logic of appropriateness is what does a person in a role like the one I have do? It is a moral question. It's a philosophical question. It's a sociological question. We need sociology and philosophy, not only economics and technology. And roles are an ideal way to elicit the upside. It's not just regulation can tell you what not to do. Only roles can help you address errors of omission, such as what Firmenich was doing, whether it was this malodor, getting business to enterprise, getting an enterprise to engage with real things. And once a role is salient, self-selection, who applies for that role? We get a better matching and a sorting in the labor market. But we have to make roles more salient. The smartest people going to finance when they could be solving so many of the problems in the world. This is clear inadequacy of role theory and too much goal theory. We have a theory of goals. We don't have a good theory of roles. Rationality is about goals. Morality is about roles. We need to start this work and accelerate it. Who was the father who taught us this? Sigmund Freud. 100 years ago, he worked out all of this stuff, and he said, we have an id, that is I. We have a superego, which is the we, the moral me. And then there is an ego in between, which has to do the arbitrage. And he says the superego is developed by the family, by teachers. Education is central to developing character. Jim Heckman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for labor economics, Jim Heckman says character is a skill. It's not just economics is a skill or programming is a skill. Jim Heckman, and he says there are two skills. There are cognitive skills and there are non-cognitive skills. It's very important that we invest more in developing these non-cognitive skills. And Freud's theory, now there are other lawyers and economists who've studied this a little bit. Here's one guy called Cass Sunstein, who is at Harvard now, a lawyer. He says, what is rational for an agent is a function of and mediated by social roles and associated norms. Now, Cass Sunstein is not necessarily a liberal, left-leaning kind of guy. Okay? And he's written a lot of good stuff. He's part of the people who works on nudge. Avner Greif is at Stanford, an economist, and he says motivation provided by norms, which are exogenous to the individuals whose behavior they influence, is the linchpin of institutions. So it seems like we can have private property, market prices, and role propriety. This is where this research is going. Now, there are many challenges, but I submit to you that roles are better than rules. That we need a logic of appropriateness, not only a logic of consequences. And of course, there are many, many challenges. Let me come to the so what. So what for business? So if you wish less regulation and less nationalization, deliver on your role, not only your goal. Business has to consult its role, not just goal. If you want to be trusted and admired, practice not only means capitalism, but also ends capitalism. Importantly, strive to integrate performance and progress. In the short run, there may be trade-offs. Sometimes in the long run, there are trade-offs. Make them. Choose them. This is the way I think we can make business a force for good. Right? Seek out coaches and mentors, not only consultants and advisors, because non-market strategy and your role is not so evident. This is not about analysis. These are so reflect on identities, pain points, and unleash imagination. Right? Let's look at whether any of this, what does this mean for business schools, board members? For board members, my plea to you is let the CEO focus on NPV. You focus on NFV, net future value. Okay? That's where reputation comes in. You have committees for compliance. You have committees for compensation. Please make committees for contribution and for coaching. Okay? And somebody said, Forbes publishes the rich list. Somebody told me, imagine we change the definition of a millionaire. A millionaire is not just someone who has $1 million in the bank, but someone who has touched 1 million people positively. That's a millionaire. Could we change that? Maybe the media can. Business schools need to promote research. To our rigor and our relevance, we need to address more research on roles. A book has just been published about a month ago by Oxford University Press addressing these kinds of issues. It's called Performance and Progress. What else does it mean for business schools? It means the following. We need to teach not only about goals, but also roles, competence and character, careers and contribution. We have a career counseling. Let's have a contribution counseling. It's not rocket science. We need to teach our students not only about risk, we need to teach them about regret. They say, take risk, minimize regret. We need to teach our students not only to measure how much, but to understand how. And finally, we need to develop this notion that business, not only government, has a role in progress, not only performance. Right? Are there any people? Well, I think already today, if you recognize, I don't know if you recognize these people, Jamshedji Tata, IG Toyota, Luis Seabra. Luis Seabra is the founder of a company in Brazil called Natura. It's a cosmetics company. IG Toyota is a Toyota car company. Tata from India founded the Tata company, which has become India's most valuable company while completely built on trust, right? I call these people industry idealists. They are not just industrialists, they are industry idealists. What's different about these people? There are three things. One, they are not just optimists, they are outright idealists. They're certainly not cynics or pessimists or realists. They are idealists. They use their imagination and they know their role, not just their goal. They have an identity. They are not just leaders, they are stewards. Can we have more? Please pardon me, I like the Nero coffee, but Starbucks, this guy is out on a roll. From his employee education to his supply chain, Starbucks has done a lot. Alibaba in China, a company in China built on trust, or what Elon Musk is trying at Tesla. There are other companies. CalPERS is today moving. It has included propriety in their first principle of corporate governance. CVS has discontinued tobacco products, etc. The point I'm making is this is possible. We need your thoughts. We need your support. But I'm so very glad that INSEAD allows us to be Jedi. What is Jedi? INSEAD has taught us about efficiency as a business school. That is the E. INSEAD has taught us about diversity as an international school. If INSEAD can also teach us about justice and how to integrate justice, efficiency, and diversity, I think we will have peace, prosperity, and propriety. Thank you very much. I wish you a good evening.